3 weeks before I decided to take this sabbatical, where I was going to go and study interoception and I'd closed down my clinic, my beautiful older brother Sam died by suicide. And it was just such a complete
Sorry.
shock to have that experience happen. And, you know, although we look at siblings and our connection with them in different ways, Sam and I had been really close right throughout our adult years too. It was a big shock, and I just spent so many months where I was stuck in anxiety. I had insomnia, I had gut issues, like they just came out of nowhere. At the same time, I was beginning to understand this science around the nervous system, which it made sense for me then. I was like, so this is what's happening.
Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and soul purpose coach, and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Jessica, welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I am thrilled to talk to you today. When I first got in touch with you and your team, the moment they said nervous system and grief and all the things, I was like, yes, I need to talk to her because this is definitely, selfishly, personally, a journey that I have certainly been on with my own grieving experience. And frankly, too, I think especially since becoming a mother in January of 2024, so I have about a little over a 1.5-year-old daughter, I've really had to tap into this more probably now than ever in my grief. So I just know that so many listeners here will benefit from your knowledge and your expertise today. But you definitely have a very, very touching, and I will just say, in my own opinion, heartbreaking story of grief and loss that has ultimately led you to the work that you do. So I would definitely like to talk to you about that today as well. But just first, a big warm welcome to you. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Tara. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you as well. And I think it's a really beautiful intersection of grief and the
Yes,
nervous system together. So
it
excited
is.
to dive into everything.
Me too. Thank you. Well, first, before we dig into the grief and loss and all the things, I love to have guests just tell like a little fun fact about themselves. It can be what you do in your spare time, just something someone might not know about you.
Oh, this is fun.
Always the hardest thing for people to answer too. They're like, "Okay, I didn't see this coming. I don't know. I'm here to talk about grief, Tara."
Yeah, well, to put it into context, this year has been a really interesting one for my family and I. So I have a daughter as well. She's
Oh.
2 and 3 months old.
Okay, so
Um,
ours aren't too far apart. Yeah.
Similar age, and it's lots of fun. But we have been on the road for nearly all of this year. We've had 3 trips to the US from
Oh
Australia.
my gosh.
We've been to Bali and then multiple interstate trips. But
So
I
fun.
ironically have this daughter who loves flying and travel and would never have normally thought you would be able to do this with a little one, but she is happier when we're on the road than when we're at
Oh,
home. So that's our family. We're a little bit of we're having a very dynamic year this year, which is exciting and fun, and also a good practice of minimalism and
yes. Oof.
being able to go with the flow with plans. So it's an interesting year for our family.
Yeah, that's exciting and amazing. And yeah, no kidding about the plans, especially with kids in general. I feel like you just can't have too much of a plan. But that's so beautiful. And we have sort of a little kindred spirit with you because my husband and I, we actually have a second podcast called Taste Toast Travel that I host with my husband, and it's all about travel and culture and food and drink and all the things. So I love
Oh,
that for you that you are living that life because there are days where I'm like very happy at home, but then there are some days where I'm like, I want to go be a nomad and live literally anywhere else. So
yes.
I love that for you.
Thank you. I'm going to check out this podcast. I bet you there's some things for us that will be super beneficial. So thank you
Yeah,
for
it's
that.
fun. It's fun. Yeah, it's just, the grief, like these conversations completely and utterly feed my soul, but that also feeds my soul in a big way. And I've talked about it on the podcast here before, so I won't belabor it too much, but travel and getting out and expanding my horizons and all of the things has also been very cathartic and healing. And it it opens our eyes, definitely. And I think for those of us with, I can tie anything to grief if I really want to, but with travel and especially when we have been through a loss and are navigating grief, like I do feel like it's such a beautiful opportunity to kind of like just make us realize, okay, what else is still out there? And so for me, it's been very healing sometimes when, especially solo traveling too, before my daughter came along and everything, like, and after my parents died, just like what I'm still grateful for in life and how much is still out there for me, and it can be very inspiring. So, yeah, but also just very fun and chaotic and all of the beautiful things. So,
Yeah, I actually can totally relate. I did solo travel as well, and I think the thing that stuck with me was how beautiful strangers were. Like
yeah.
people I didn't even know that I just ended up talking to and tell them my story, and they invited me to join them for things. And,
Oh, that's
I
beautiful.
made really lifelong friends through that process as well. So I
Yeah.
think it's something really magical when you not only are traveling, but also when you're open and honest,
Yeah.
obviously still having your senses about you and your
Yes.
but, being able to connect with people that you might not ever have had before if you were telling them your story.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's I think where to bring it back to grief because this is not my other podcast, just the I was just talking about this to someone earlier today actually, but that is such the beautiful thing about grief, I think, is it really does bond us and connect us on such a soulful level, and it's why you and I are here talking right now, right? Like, there is a similarity there even though our stories are so different on paper, so that being said, perfect segue into my sort of first, I'll say, question for you is, like I mentioned, the work that you do is very much, or so it seems, stemmed from a lot of your past experiences with loss. So I would love for you to just tell listeners, your story, whatever you are comfortable sharing.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting place of professional and personal growth
Mhm.
that I was in, and it was back in 2017, and I had my own clinic, and it was what you could say was a successful clinic. I had a lot of patients. I was had a team that I was mentoring other health professionals as well as running a business. I probably had bitten off more than I could chew, but that was who I was. I was very
Yeah.
much about I can do this and very stoic. I was doing triathlons. I like to push myself then,
Yeah.
and I decided that with the clients and patients I was seeing that I was frustrated because I often felt like there was something missing with the work I was doing. So
Mm.
I was seeing people with a lot of chronic conditions, sometimes like post traumatic stress disorder, but
Mm.
it could have just been following periods of chronic and traumatic stress, like, losing somebody you love.
Yeah.
And I kept seeing patients come in to see me with something like back pain, but I knew underneath the surface of the water, a bit like an iceberg, there was more to it.
Yeah.
And just this correlation with physical and emotional symptoms that there wasn't an empowering way for me to educate clients and also give them resources they could use themselves to help support their, what we say now, the nervous system. But at the time, I wasn't sure the framework of what I was actually working with.
Mm.
And, in my clinic, we had everything from, physical therapy to massage to meditation. Like, we were really diverse. I had a
Wow.
podcast, and I still felt like there's something else to add to this.
Yeah.
So I was really looking at this fascinating research on interoception, which is how we connect with our bodily signals. And it's really the communication between the brain and the body. So,
Mm.
we've had a bit of a swing towards looking at the body, which is great. But this is really looking a bit more at how brain and body communicate and the influence that they have on each other. So,
Mhm.
3 weeks before I decided to take this sabbatical, where I was going to go and study interoception and I'd closed down my clinic, my beautiful older brother Sam died by suicide. And it was just such
So
a complete
sorry.
shock to have that experience happen. And, you know, although we look at siblings and our connection with them in different ways, Sam and I had been really close right throughout our adult years too. Um, we'd had share houses or we lived in similar cities, and we had a really close relationship, but he wasn't someone that would want to burden anyone with his challenges.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a big shock, and I just spent so many months where I was stuck in anxiety, I had insomnia, I had gut issues, like
Mm.
they just came out of nowhere. And then for some other months, I'd feel like I was stuck. Like I remember being invited to this party and trying everything I could to get myself off the couch to go, and I just couldn't. It was like my body was like, "Mm-mm, you're not
Mm-mm.
going." And I
Mm.
kept oscillating between this, and at the same time, I was beginning to understand this science around the nervous system, which it made sense for me then. I was like, "Ah, so this is what's happening." I'm
Yeah.
actually, going from mobilization and anxiety down to this like shutdown, collapse state. And
Mm.
what became apparent was that I was processing Sam's loss, and from my own approach of life before, of soldiering on, pushing through
Mhm.
this, I realized it wasn't working. I was every time it was like a 6-month anniversary of his death, I was just like, I should be past this by now. What is going on?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I realized it wasn't going to work to take a real analysis of this. And, we look at things like the stages of grief, which are very linear.
Mhm.
This doesn't work. It's
Not
like it
realistic at all. Yeah.
no. And so I was really interested in that intersection between the nervous system and grief, or what was happening, and getting this understanding that things needed to move or need to be able to be expressed in a very primal way.
Yeah.
And it was also at that time that I started to have some memories from my childhood come up too
Mm.
at about 6 months, which had always sort of just laid, beneath that surface of awareness. But when I was 4, I'd actually lost my younger brother as well. And so the grief of that decided to come up and say, okay, I want to be processed too. So it was a really tough time of daily ups and downs, and being able to develop this capacity to almost meet what felt like a tsunami coming in some days,
Mhm.
and allow it to come through without having this top down or cognitive timeline or judgment or any way that things should look. And
Mhm.
it was a really long time, and it was very challenging at times, but it did actually shape the way that I went on to work with my patients. And that was, yeah, 2017. So I think we've had over
Wow.
25,000 practitioners and students come through
Oh my God.
and study with us over the years, which has been fantastic. And now I mostly work just with coaches, clinicians, and health practitioners through the nervous system certification course. So it's definitely become my life's work.
No kidding. Oh my gosh. You're so called into this. I hate that it took this is I feel kind of similarly. I don't want to put words in your mouth. This is sort of how I feel about the work that I do is like I just feel like I was soulfully led into this. I don't know. I could have easily just not done anything with after the deaths of my parents, and you don't no one has to, right? We can have loved ones die and not get into grief and lost space and all the things, but there was just something that I couldn't ignore and felt very called into, and so it sounds like that was very much the case for you as well, but almost like just literally really through your body and listening to that. So my question for you is like, what did that kind of process look like for you? So especially dealing with your more recent passing of your brother, but then just talk to me about because you mentioned that, the grief from your first brothers came up as well. So, like, what did that look like for you? And how did you sort of first begin coping with that? Because the timing of all of this, too, is so crazy how you were going to shut down your clinic and then all of this comes up. So, I'm just curious, like, what those first even like few weeks looked like for you, and then kind of like how you've sort of gotten to
Mm.
where you are now?
Mm. It's interesting. I probably didn't understand it all until looking back retrospectively. So when
Yeah.
Sam died in 2017, I actually did the eulogy, and I realized now that I was probably just out of my body and
Yeah. Yeah.
grieving something. I remember the room feeling really spacey and like I wasn't
Mm.
I almost felt like I could have fainted. Like I walked back down the stairs from the where I did the talk, and I remember going, "Oh," and that is, that is that collapse and shutdown. But
Right.
I saw it retrospectively of just how much I was in shock, but
Yeah.
pretending that everything was fine because I wanted to support my parents.
Mm.
And so I had a conversation with them about still going, and they said, "We think that you should." And
Mm.
it definitely was the best thing to do. I often played, and this was a pattern that I had from the loss of my younger brother. I would go into fixer and rescuer mode a lot.
Yeah.
And it played out as dynamics in my relationships prior to Sam dying, unconsciously, like my romantic relationships. It wasn't until I met my now husband in the end of 2018, and he pointed it out to me, and he's like, we're early on in the dating, and he's like, why does everyone come up and tell you their problems? And I was like, they don't. And he's like, yes, they do. And it was like I had taken on that. I've got to, be available to help everyone. And it was definitely a method that I developed from being quite young. So
Yeah.
these things were playing out subconsciously from my younger brother Luke's death
All
that
right.
I wasn't actually aware of. And
Yeah. And
it's
you're
so
4 at the time too. So, like, how does a 4-year-old yeah, oh my gosh.
So it's really interesting because this is a lot of the work I teach now. If you look for children who have childhood, let's call them adversities, because it can be quite broad what happens
Yeah. Sure.
when there's a lot of emotional charge, and particularly because they don't have the language to develop it, it
Mhm.
comes into what we call implicit memories. And so
Right.
implicit memories, they're not like recalling when you rode your bike for the first time without your training wheels at 5. Implicit
Mhm.
memories are the fact that your body knows how to get on your bike today and ride it without thinking about it. And so
Right.
this is exactly what our nervous system does. So what was happening to me when Sam died was implicit memories were getting triggered and they were activated. And
Oh my
so
god.
within my body, I was starting to have these really strong visceral sensations of panic and, the world's fallen apart. Like, you know what it's like when you lose somebody and there's a shock of like, wow, I think the other shoe's going to drop. So
Oh god, yes.
you're already a little bit on edge. That kept happening. And
Yeah.
as I developed a better process of interoception, which was this ability to sit with what was there. And now I'm not saying we all do that. It takes, you've got to build some capacity first. But I
Mhm.
was having then the visuals come up of what I was actually, what part of me it was and what I was seeing. And I connected it to, oh, this is from when I was 4.
Wow.
And this is today. So it was intense. And I had support from good therapists, but I
Mhm.
certainly it took me a while to find somebody to work with that I found helpful. A lot of
Mm.
talking about it just was not helping me.
Mhm.
Uh, it felt like activating what was in my body and then leaving a session. So yeah,
Oh, God.
it took some time, but when I found the right person, it was great.
Yeah, I always hear that, like, finding a good therapist is kinda like dating, like, you really have to find a good match. Because I 'cause I've had people that have, like, come to me for coaching, and they're like, "Honestly, I've done therapy or I am trying therapy, but on it like, I find for some people, it's really helpful just to talk it out, that's kind of all they need, but then a lot of them are like, I left and they were like, "Okay, session's over," and it's, like, very transactional, and they were like, "I don't feel like I have any tools to even cope with this." They didn't give me anything to like grasp onto and actually apply in my day-to-day life. So I think it's one of the many reasons that the work you would do is so important. And so I'd love to get into some of those coping tools and things. But one thing I was so curious about because, and I know, I know people in my own life is why I'm kind of laughing about this that are like, I certainly am a believer, and there's science to back this, that trauma can be stored in the body and things, and there's people in my orbit, and maybe people here listening can empathize with this, where there are people that just don't believe that, or they just don't believe in, like, regulating the nervous system. I don't know how they don't believe in it. It's, again, literal science, and they just struggle with wanting to put in the effort to regulate their nervous system and whatnot, because they don't believe that, like, their grief or the trauma and their body are connected. They're very much like, oh, if I'm having a gut issue, that's a problem with how my literal body is functioning. It's not me. If I'm making any sense with that, or like,
Mm.
it's not my trauma, it's not my grief, it's not my PTSD, it's just my gut's acting up, or my chronic back pain, or whatever. It's just pain. It has nothing to do with that. What are you talking about?
Mm.
So, have you seen that in your time, and can you just explain a little bit of just how trauma or grief or whatever can show up in the physical body? And I just think it's so important for people to truly understand, like, the core of how those two things are connected.
Of course, yes. I think it's a great point, Tara. And we've come from a really top down society that values
Mhm.
mindset work, that values thinking. And we often say, well, if I can think differently, then I'll feel better. Now,
Mhm.
that is actually called top down regulation, where if we have certain thoughts or beliefs or language or narrative, it changes how we feel. And that
Yeah.
is really important. It's definitely seen in the placebo effect. So we've got good evidence to show that by taking a tablet that people just believe is going to change their immune system, it does.
Mhm.
But what we haven't acknowledged or have moved away from is the body's influence on the brain. And
Mhm.
we are looking at the vagus nerve, which is this incredible two-way communication system between our brain and body. And 80% of its fibers are running from the body up to the brain.
Wow.
So the vagus nerve's job is largely in emotional regulation, but it also plays a role in regulating our systems and our organs as well. So you spoke about the gut. Now, we have a literal gut brain axis. And we are seeing more and more science to support what's happening in the gut will influence the brain, what's happening in the brain will influence the gut, and we get these loops. So when I spoke before about having gut issues after Sam died, what was actually happening was because I was in such a state of anxiety and mobilization, where it's like urgency, you can't
Mhm.
sleep, like it's a real pattern in the nervous system. It means my vagus nerve isn't slowing me back down again, and so my digestive system's motility changes, which is movement of food through the gut.
Okay.
I'll have changes in my gut pH, I'll have changes in the secretions, it'll change my microbiome, and those changes in the gut microbiome can lead to inflammation, which, is something through the body. And now if we look at something like irritable bowel syndrome, which
Mhm.
we've technically said it's a gut issue,
Mhm.
it's now been reclassified as a disorder of gut brain interaction.
Wow, I did not know that.
So it's more to do with how the brain and the gut are signaling to each other. And in terms of chronic conditions, this is what we see gets impacted by the process of neuroplasticity, where we see that the brain and the nervous system change because of what we experience. So
Right.
let's take my experience of losing my brother. The part of my brain called the survival brain, which is lower down and acts outside of conscious awareness.
Mhm.
The survival brain will determine what state of our nervous system we move into. And every experience we have, we are encoding as a memory and we are learning from.
Right.
So we don't even know this, but that we are learning from that, not in the way of learning maths or learning times
Mhm.
tables, but learning from a survival point of view. And
Right.
when we say that we can think or use our thinking brain to stop ourselves feeling anxious, it doesn't work because the part that is to do with our fear, our
Mhm.
anxiety, our agitation, our shutdown, it's a survival brain role. So we
Right.
can't talk our way out of trauma. We can't think our way out of trauma. And when we are spending periods of time like I was in anxiety and down in shutdown, we say that that's when the nervous system has become dysregulated because
Mhm.
we've experienced this chronic and traumatic stress. Now, if we have long periods of dysregulation of the
Yeah.
nervous system, that can change our digestive system, as I explained. It
Right.
changes the immune system, it changes the hormonal system. Nearly every system can be impacted because the nervous system is the thing that typically regulates how all of those things function. So that's why we often see, well, we know there's good science to show adversity early on in life can lead to chronic illnesses later on in life, um,
Mhm.
which it's sort of having a correction away from this very top down focus we've had on things to being, well, the body, or what we say bottom up, is important too. We probably are seeing a slight overcorrection now to everything
Mm.
is about bottom up. But I think
Mhm.
what is the most important thing is that we're looking at both bottom up and top down regulation.
Yeah.
And the key is when we use those resources. So if we are highly stressed and we try to think our way out of it, that's not going to work. But
Mhm.
if we are feeling more regulated and we might journal, or like you said, we might be able to talk it out then.
Right.
It's more to do with the timing, or what I call it trauma sensitive sequencing of when we use what resource.
Wow. Okay. There is so much to unpack there. I was just nerding out on all of that. I was like, "Oh my god, tell me more." I This is so fascinating. And you just kind of blew my mind there a little bit because I think, and even how we say it, right? Mind body connection. Like, I think it's, you just hit the nail on the head, I think, with so many things in life and how we just on social media and things that we say, like, if you think it, you can create it and all of this stuff. And maybe there's some truth to that too. But how beautiful to just turn that around a bit and acknowledge, like, okay, but body, mind, like, let's also consider that. So, so many different directions I could go with this, but in terms of, because I'm also thinking back, on my grieving journey and experience, and for people listening here, they might hear all of that and they could be like, "Okay, great, Jessica, this is amazing, but what now? What can I keep in mind? What can I do in my day-to-day life to better regulate all of these things?" And I know for a fact, I've spoken to fellow grievers or even past clients that do definitely struggle with either some chronic pain or something in that realm. And I will just speak for here in America. I'm not going to speak for everybody, but doctors and things are very quick to be like, here's a prescription, here's this, here's that. And I'm like, oh my God, can we just like try our body first and tap into that and get in touch with that? So, what would you say to someone here listening who may or may not be feeling any type of pain necessarily, but who is interested in this and wants to just either feel more regulated on a day-to-day basis, or maybe they have moments where that kind of spikes a little bit and then they're like they come back down or whatever. What would you say to them? And you can answer this however you like. It could, what tools do you find helpful? I'd love to just open that up to you.
It's such a good question. And
It's a loaded question. I apologize, but
no, 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 you're fine.
just
Um,
kind of where would you start?
I think the most important thing is being specific to what
Mm.
resource you use, to what state you're in. So it's a little bit like saying, I've got blood pressure. And it's like, well, is it high or is
Okay,
it low?
well,
How do we work with it? So it's the same with the nervous system. We've all got one.
yep.
So what's it doing? Now, we need to understand the nervous system not necessarily in a cognitive way, but in a very experiential way so
Hmm.
that we can say, oh, that me holding my jaw and this urgency and the thoughts that come from being in this state are, I've got to go faster. I've got to do more. Something bad's going to happen. Go, go, go. Oh, I haven't got this all under control.
Mhm.
That's definitely that sympathetic mobilization. So it's like the accelerator or the gas is down on the car and you're just revving, revving, revving.
Yeah.
So if we look at what we would use as a resource then, what we see is happening is there's this mobilization of energy getting us ready, prepared. So
Mhm.
often we find, well, how can I discharge this excess energy? And people naturally feel like they need to move anyway. So
Yeah.
movement is such a beautiful way to do that. I think the challenge is when we've had chronic dysregulation, the body feels like this wiredness, but there's an exhaustion. So
Mhm.
it can actually just be a gentle type of movement to allow that. And then as it comes down, we actually connect to what's happening in the body. So when
Yeah.
I think about grief, it kind of reminds me of childbirth.
Mhm.
And there's this really powerful surge of life force and energy when you go into labor that's primal and we have absolutely no control over it. And I actually think there's a lot of this with grief where if we could give it space
Mhm.
to let this move through our body instead of trying to control it with our thinking brain of what
Yeah.
should be like, where we should be at, what it how to grieve properly,
Oh, yeah.
it would take so much pressure off people. So very much about connecting to what we're experiencing once we settle a little bit. And that's
Mhm.
one way that we work with that activation. Now, for people who are more shut down and collapsed, they need to bring their energy up. So it's a little
Mhm.
bit like the handbrake is stuck. Now, a lot of that, like the energy and the thoughts and the story from that state of immobilization, will make us withdraw, isolate, stonewall. Now, I can remember I wouldn't answer my friends' phone calls in that state,
Mhm.
but when I did, I felt so much better after talking to them. And
Mhm.
we need to connect in that state if we can, even through a text
Yeah.
or just being where people are. You know, I feel like I'm telling you all these stories, but it's helpful for
No,
understanding.
this is great context, please. Yeah.
Speaking of the solo travel, I was in France only a few months after Sam died, and no one was speaking English. I had never felt so alone. I just remember that I went back to my hotel room, sat there, and I just put my hands on my heart and was like, please, can I just be with this hurt, this suffering? And I remember I cried and I cried and I cried and let that move and express
Mhm.
without any, trying to fix it. But I asked into that part inside my body, what is it that you need right now?
Yeah.
And it said community. So I
Mhm.
Googled grief retreat, which sounds so morbid, but as timing would have it, I found in Colorado a 7-day silent retreat that was all on grief. And it was not, it backed onto when I was actually going to the US and I went to that retreat. And it wasn't that I needed to talk, but I needed to sit with other people and be
Yeah.
a part of something whilst I was able to sit with what was happening inside of me. And I shared a room with this woman who we got through the end of the retreat and we started talking, and it turned out she'd lost her brother to suicide as well.
Oh my
And she
god.
said, why don't you come and stay with my family once this is over?
Oh,
And so I did. And it was like to share that somebody else understood what that was like
right.
was the most therapeutic thing that I could have had happen. So there's a part where if we can connect, like sometimes that looks like crying, sobbing, being a mess, collapsing on the floor. Sometimes it's being held by somebody who says nothing. And
Yeah.
then we tune in and we ask into this hurt and where it lives, what is it that you need? Sometimes just allowing the answer to come from there is a different experience to labels, judgments, and
Mhm.
stages. And this is where I love looking at grief as what state am I in? What's happening in my nervous system, and what do I need? Because we talk so much about self regulation, but
Yeah.
self regulation isn't there to calm down, get rid of. It's to listen inward and
Right.
support our needs and our emotions in a really proactive way.
Yeah. So beautiful. And I can't believe you just said, like, what do I need right now? Because I've said that in other episodes as well. And it's like one of the biggest, most important and pivotal questions I've started to ask myself. Because and I think this is so important for grievers to hear because unfortunately, not all of us have a great support system or maybe don't have one right in a particular moment where we might be going through we're in an activated state, we're triggered by something, we're hyperventilating on the ground, and so I've learned the hard way just through my own experience, like being able to talk ourselves through that and be our own sort of safety blanket, I guess, if you will, and be able to ask those questions of like, okay, like exactly what you did in that hotel room, right? Like you put your hands on your like, okay, let me actually feel my body right now, feel the blood running through my veins, all the things.
Mhm.
And it's the bravest thing that we can do to ask that question. And sometimes we might not know the answer, right? But to those check-ins are pivotal. Like I'm not going to be dramatic. They've been life-changing for me. And it's really clarifying too because sometimes the answer that comes up surprises me a little
Yes.
bit. I'm like, "Oh, okay." And it's
Yes.
really just helped kind of solidify and confirm like my own intuition, my own body's responses to things of what feels good and what lights me up and what doesn't. Like what is
Mhm.
high vibe, kind of great, again, things that spark joy versus things that are draining or like I can feel it in ways physically that I've never been able to before. So it's been a beautiful kind of journey of self-discovery there too. But so it's great. It serves two purposes, right? We learn a lot about ourselves, but then, here we are being able to do the regulation as well.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to let grief express
Yes.
and
Yeah.
let it move.
Mm.
It moves through our body when we cry and our diaphragm shakes, when we have
Mhm.
that real movement through our body, where we notice our face moves, when we have our belly clench, when we're really, having letting that come through. It can be through sound. But my concern with a very linear, state specific, time specific pressure on what this should look like means we are stopping that process. It's
Right.
like trying to stop childbirth. There are these physiological processes that
Yeah.
help us metabolize what has happened. It's not to say that we don't need support or we don't need to make choices or we don't need to include all of the other bits and pieces too, but where it tends to become chronic and impact our nervous system is when we don't let that process of this moving and it expressing. And with self regulation, there has to be an expression of that where we
Yeah.
are tuning into what our body is saying and acting in some way. But I
Mm.
think what people tend to do is they either suppress it before it can be felt,
Mhm.
or they go straight to this process of like, "I need to get this out. Quick, get rid of it, get rid of it."
Right.
But we need to experience that process, which is so painful,
Yeah.
when we lose somebody we love, but it is that metabolizing of that that allows us to move through the grieving process.
Definitely. Yeah, well said. I see why people suppress it. I understand why people want to ignore it and just and push and push and push, but I don't know, in my own personal life, I've seen the ramifications of that. And I don't say that to like scare fear monger or scare anybody, but it just
Right.
again, just to hammer home the importance of like even just little small practices here and there, just getting our feet wet with this is so important. So that being said, so you mentioned even like in your example, right? You went to your hotel room, you did the kind of breath work, putting your hands on yourself. You've mentioned movement, so be it a walk or maybe some sort of somatic dance or something like that. Like, are there any other, forms of whatever you want to call this, coping, healing outlets that listeners here could maybe consider and explore
Mm.
to help with this, nervous system regulation?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this in a different way, but I think the most important part is co-regulation because
Mm.
there are days where you feel like you can't hold all of that yourself.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Co-regulation doesn't necessarily mean that we have to talk about what we're experiencing. It can be sitting with somebody and you don't talk at all.
Mhm.
It could be just curling up, with your partner and have them hold you and hug you.
Mhm.
It can be a pet, so
Mhm.
having a pet that's like you're just holding on to as well. And people talk about this a lot in nature as well, so
Mm.
that you're in an environment where you are feeling like you're connected to what's happening around you in nature. And I think we've probably lost a little bit of that in a world that's hyper independent and looks at like this is my nervous system inside me. But
Mhm.
know that the nervous system is relational, and one of the most, okay, I'm going to say the most effective way to bring bottom up regulation very quickly is through being around somebody else who's regulated, whether that's a person or an
Mhm.
animal, because you don't need to think about it. It's
Right.
just the cues that you are receiving that can help you shift. And for me, it was more of a group. And if you look at many spiritual traditions, they will say that community is a true refuge that you can be in. And I think it's really true, but it's hard to find. Like
Yeah.
it's not, a lot of us don't have those communities that we belong to anymore.
Mhm. It's so true. I've been so blessed to find, people like you and just like getting in touch with other people who are comfortable sitting in that grief or can at least begin to understand. And again, this is relevant for listeners here too, but like what we've been through, what I've been through. And it has been so cathartic and so healing. And it's not like my husband or my other close friends or whoever aren't supportive people, but sometimes it's a little surface level because they don't know how to hold space or
Mm.
they're just like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, sweetie," or, "I'm sorry." Like, there's a lot of "I'm sorry," and it's a lot of like, "You okay? You're good? Okay. All right, just checking." I'm like,
Yes.
"Okay, well, that was fun while it lasted. Thanks." But like, I kinda need a little more than that. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so the community so many guests have come on and said that as well. So it's definitely, that part of it is not to be taken lightly. Like I think we underestimate, I think, how much community can impact us. And I definitely went through this. Like I went inward for sure. I definitely like kind of self-isolated a little bit. And it was a blessing in some ways. I think I needed that. I needed my alone time for me personally, it was very important in terms of processing what had all happened and all the things. And not like I didn't keep in touch with people, but it was just I think that's what my nervous system needed at the time, honestly, was just quiet and because it was very chaotic for a long time. And to kind of like come back down to earth a little bit. But going to therapy I did for a few months, just having an outlet and then slowly starting to talk to fellow grievers and understand like I'm just like, wow, okay, I'm not alone. What I'm feeling is pretty normal and having this very conversation we're having, right? Like normalizing it and the realities of it and what realistic quote coping looks like and how we can really integrate that into our day to day. So as we start to kind of wrap up, is there anything we maybe haven't talked about today that you would say is like something that every griever specifically should maybe know about the nervous system as it, like, again, specifically relates to loss or navigating or experiencing grief? Anything we maybe haven't
Mhm.
talked about yet today?
Mm. I think a nice way to tie it all together is to look at there's no normal way of grieving.
Hmm.
For some people, like I think then of like I lost my grandmother 3 years ago and she got to 91. We had such a beautiful relationship, but
Yeah.
I wasn't sad when she died, and
Mhm.
I felt like that was wrong, but I thought like for me it was like she's had a great life,
You had a good run. Yeah.
ready to go.
Yeah.
We had a really uncomplicated, beautiful, loving relationship. Her love
Oh,
is with me for all the time I feel her love.
yeah.
Um, And then I was like, "Is this wrong?"
You're like, "This feels slimy, but sorry."
I think there's a part where, for some people, grief can be relief. It can be
Yes.
it can be love. It can be it doesn't we don't need to put this blanket onto this is how you should be grieving. So that's number 1. So
Beautifully said.
the second part of that is if we are looking at the survival brain, that lower part of the center of the brain, we are really looking at that's where grieving is happening. It's not a cognitive psychological process. It's
Right.
really a way of, as I said, metabolizing what's happened. And the neural networks in that lower center of the brain, they don't exist for telling time. So when you get triggered, there's your survival brain doesn't know if it was yesterday or if it was 15 years ago. And
Mhm.
to take away the judgment that comes from the higher centers of the brain, because it will allow you to actually process what's happened. And I think this is where I really see nervous system work and understanding that as the thing that brings people true resilience, because what my experience was after Sam died, for many days, like there'd be at the start, it would feel like this tsunami came in and it was just
Mhm.
unrelenting.
Mhm.
And then what started to happen was there was spaces between waves. It was like sets were coming, but there was a
Mhm.
little bit more space, a little bit more space. And then it would go to months. But sometimes those waves would hit with the same intensity that was
Mhm.
there at the start. And I think this is something helpful for us to know that if you do get hit by a tsunami 6 months, 2 years, 3 years later,
Yeah.
you're not doing something wrong. It's just a way that this is coming through you in this particular time. And it's almost like we have no control over that process. But what helps us is to understand what's happening in our nervous system, where sometimes it can like the days before my brother's memorial where I would have anxiety
Mhm.
about it, thinking, "What should I be doing? How do I wanna be on this day?" And then I'd get to the day and just crash. And I
Yeah.
think in hindsight, if I'd had more understanding, I would have allowed the anxiety just to come, just to be what it is, and work with it. And then on the day, like, I still have the emotions, but I wouldn't swing up and down as much. So,
Right.
I think for people to understand what's happening in their nervous system around those challenging times, it just helps you to ride those waves and come back
Mhm.
down again without it being you're not so stuck in those stages of being stuck, like you're agitated or drop down and can't do anything.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I've worked with many people that were like, again, we're kind of to bring it full circle back to the stuckness that I think a lot of people are feeling. That's such great insight. And I love how you explain this, that it's a lot of this is it's happening in the lower brain. I think a lot of people don't know that or forget that, or they think that because it's not like in their how would you do, I don't want to like misword this, like in your kind of consciousness, right? Like that higher brain sort of
Yeah, like
thinking, I
thinking
guess.
brain, like
Like,
something you can control or choose or,
yeah,
think your way out of or mindset your way out of, which you just
right.
you can't mindset your way out of grief.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, mic drop. That was so well said. And so just thank you for saying that because I think there's shame around that, right? Or that like I think because our society has also gotten so like in this, you can mindset work yourself out of it. And then if people like can't do that or they're struggling with that or whatever, they're like, I'm doing something wrong.
Yes.
We're in just such a time of I'm just doing something wrong, I think. Like, no
Yes.
one can it's exhausting. It's exhausting right now. It's been exhausting for a while, and especially for those of us grieving. We're exhausted because of that too, and then life is just lifing.
Yes.
But I really appreciate that because I've mentioned that on the podcast before. It's like, and there's so much going on in our brain, in our nervous system, and everything when we're grieving. Things we are, I would say, however many percentage of us, probably a very high percent, are not aware of.
Mhm.
And certainly the people around us aren't aware of it or they're not being mindful of it. So, just more to the point of like why we need to have compassion and patience for ourselves and the process. And like you said, like throwing the timeline out the window a little
Yes.
bit and just giving ourselves grace. My God, like we've been through a lot and it can continue to come up. And then, again, you're a beautiful example of like some very, very early childhood, early life grief. And I think some people have this misconception that like, grief or like a loss like that might not affect, i.e., a 4-year-old, but that is, simply not true, right? And so, and then, any family dynamics that might have unfolded like in your life throughout that, and your poor parents losing a child, and what of that you might have absorbed. And so, there's so many nuances to this, I think, but
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. And it definitely it really did shape the, both losses of my brothers. Like one
yeah,
created a whole series of things I was unaware of, but then the loss of Sam brought everything to the surface. And
no
in a
kidding.
way, the unraveling that it brought a career change.
Mhm.
I've met my now husband, who we have a very healthy dynamic, and have my beautiful daughter. And I think like there are, I would give anything to have both of my brothers back, but
Mhm.
there are also things that we learn from post-traumatic growth that
Yes.
gives us such greater wisdom.
Mhm.
We don't want to bypass the pain, but
Yeah.
from that we do develop a bigger capacity. And for me, and it sounds like for you as well, Tara, a greater purpose for what we do.
Yes. I was literally just thinking purpose. You're crazy. Get out of my head. No, as you were talking, I was like, when you were mentioning kind of the greater capacity for growth and everything, and I was like, and our purpose and what we've been led into. And it's incredible and beautiful. And if we had shut down, not that we haven't had our shutdown moments, but like if we had shut that down and whatever, like wouldn't have been open to it and we wouldn't be sitting here talking right now. So
Exactly.
how incredible, and you would have helped so many people. And so really quick, I want to end this by asking you where people can find you, but you also have 2 really amazing certifications, it sounds like, as well, because you mentioned the vagus nerve earlier. So I
Yes.
believe you have one there and then just a nervous system regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you just briefly touch on those? Because I find that fascinating and I'm very interested myself, so
Yes, of course. So for people who might work with others who are coaches and clinicians or health practitioners, we have a 12-week nervous system certification course, and that covers all of the things like trauma sensitive sequencing, like when to use what resources, but a lot of it is on giving neuro education, like things like the difference between the survival brain and the thinking
Mhm.
brain. So it's really giving clinicians everything they need to start working with people through a nervous system informed lens.
Beautiful.
It doesn't mean you change your modality, it's to plug into the work you're already doing.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of personal growth in that too. So
Yeah.
it's for if you want to help others and you want to work on yourself. But for people who don't help others and just want to help their own nervous system, we have an 8-week vagus nerve program as well. And they are both on my website, which is just my name, jessicamaguire.com.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. That's such beautiful work that you're putting out into the world. Certainly for others helping others. Like we all need more heart-centered work out there, but then I mean also just equipping people to do it on their own time and just be a more regulated person. And then God willing, like we were saying, that raises our frequency, then we can like give more of that, put more of that back out into the world and maybe even indirectly help others as well. Because you mentioned something earlier, and this has definitely happened to me when you like go into a room or you're in a room with someone who is not well regulated. But you are like you can feel the difference, or you can feel their dysregulation rubbing off on you, or at least with me. And I'm like, don't mess up my vibe here, like, I'm like, "I worked hard for this, okay?" So it does take a little
Yeah,
bit of work, but
yeah,
it's a beautiful process, and there's so much again, just, science behind this and just it sounds like more and more coming out by the day. So
yeah,
exciting, space to be in, but I'm just so grateful to you for your time and for your, again, just knowledge and expertise today. I certainly learned a whole lot of things, so I'm just very grateful to you.
Thank you so much, Tara. Thank you for letting me come here and nerd out on this topic. And
I love it. This is
it's
for me, even if no one else liked it. I'm here for it.
well, it's always great to speak to somebody who has had that, where it's really felt like the bottom of the world has fallen out when you
Yeah.
lose people. And it's a big shock. But to know that if anybody's listening to this who's in that place,
Yeah.
even though it feels like climbing a mountain, you definitely do get to the other side, and those waves have a lot more space between them.
Yeah, definitely. Just knowing like the relief it is out there, and yes, we have to put a little bit of the work in to get there at times, but I definitely think you did a beautiful job of just instilling that sort of that hope and that inspiration in everyone here today, and yeah, just gave us so many things to walk away with and consider, both with again just day-to-day stressors in life and things that come up, but also just coping with our grief. So, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Tara.
I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains, and on Instagram and TikTok at Life with Grief Podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.